Hello. 8 years ago, Rowan Williams, who was then Archbishop of Canterbury, suggested that some aspects of Sharia law could find a place within the British legal system as part of the effort to improve community relations. The suggestion caused an uproar. Since then, Sharia councils have rarely been out of the headlines. They provide advice to Muslims who voluntarily choose to use them to resolve family and civil disputes. The findings of such councils are not legally binding, but human rights campaigners have raised concerns that they discriminate against women. The government has now launched an inquiry into claims that Sharia councils are acting in a discriminatory and unacceptable way. But it will also seek out examples of best practice among Sharia councils. So what is the real picture? Does Sharia law really offer a parallel legal system, as critics often state? Is such a system at odds with the laws and customs of this country? And if Sharia councils have a place in British society, what role should they play? Joining me to discuss Sharia councils in the United Kingdom are Dr. Amra Bone, who sits on the panel for the Sharia Council in Birmingham Central Mosque and lectures on gender and Islam at the Cambridge Muslim College. Dr. Samia Bano, an expert in Muslim family law in the UK at the School of Law at SOAS, University of London. And Mariam Namazi, a human rights activist from the campaign group One Law for All. Amra, in a couple of sentences, tell me why you think Sharia councils are a good thing.
I think Sharia councils are a necessity for people who do not have a recourse to civil courts as their marriages aren't recognised, and particularly for women who'll be left stranded. If there was nowhere for these women to go, they would be in a limbo and stranded, not know whether they're married or divorced.
Mariam, is she right?
No, I think Sharia courts are highly discriminatory. They violate women's rights, and in fact even the process could be seen to be tantamount to some form of psychological abuse.
And Samia?
Well, Sharia councils do provide Muslim women with the divorce certificate. So there is a question of user need there in terms of why Muslim women would choose to go to Sharia councils in order to potentially get a divorce certificate. But I also agree that we need to think carefully and strike a note of caution into debates around the recognition and accommodation of Sharia councils in Britain today.
We need to explain what Sharia law is, Amra. It comes from two sources, I gather, the Quran and the Hadith, the traditions of the Prophet.
It's a divine guidance that is provided in the Quran and in the life of the Prophet. It's not a prescriptory or codified law, and the understanding of that can vary from time to time depending on the context. So what we try to do is to try and understand the context, our context in Britain today, and apply that divine guidance, not a prescribed codified law as is often portrayed. We give equality to women and men, make them feel that they can move on with their lives and come out of that misery that they have experienced over the last 5, 6 to 10 years.
But Samia, if it was in a Muslim-dominated country, like, let's say, Saudi Arabia, Sharia law would basically be the whole of the law.
Yes, and I think that's an important point there, Ernie, because we need to think quite carefully about what a Sharia council is in a diasporic Muslim context, and that is a Muslim minority context. Sharia councils don't exist jurisprudentially in Islamic law. They're very much a British product. They're not actually even a European product. And I think we need to think quite carefully about what we mean by a Sharia council and the way we use terms. Are they tribunals? Are they courts? Are they councils? Because we need to think about the way in which they've emerged, where they're located, and what services they provide. And I think at this juncture, I would just point out that there actually isn't a unified definition of what a Sharia council is. So the whole relationship or our discussion in terms of Sharia councils as one, I think is quite problematic because there's a diversity on the ground.
What does it cover in the UK? What sort of issues does it cover, Mariam?
They're dealing with primarily family law. And of course, they're not dealing with hudud ordinances, which are related to criminal aspects of the law. But family matters are also highly discriminatory wherever we see Sharia courts practiced, whether it's issues around polygamy, it's issues also, for example, child custody. So whilst there is no official Sharia, and there are many schools, what we see uniformly is that it is discriminatory against women, right, particularly because we're seeing that the interpretations that are often imposed are the most conservative and the most fundamentalist.
Just to be absolutely clear, Samir, would I be right in saying that basically Sharia councils deal with giving women divorce certificates. Is that the vast majority of what they do?
The primary role of a Sharia council is to issue Muslim women with a Muslim divorce certificate, because in Islam they need a religious scholar to pronounce the type of divorce they can have. So therefore, that's the primary objective. But because it's a family law context, and we know family law is very messy and it doesn't just include marriage and divorce, there are multiple issues. There is a complexity of what's going on the ground there.
Amra, just to be absolutely clear, are issues on child custody and inheritance legally beyond the scope of Sharia councils?
As far as the law stands, yes.
Does that mean that they don't do it, Shami?
Well, we don't do it.
We have evidence where they will discuss potential issues of contact and access. But in terms of enforceability, absolutely, English family law reigns supreme. It is English family law that has jurisdiction, best interests of the child, the welfare principle remain supreme in this, and the court and the councils themselves cannot deliver judgments on this. Whether or not actually in practice, though, in these spaces, these issues are discussed in terms of, well, I can provide you with the divorce certificate if you allow me to see the children. There may be some potential conflict. That is certainly something that we have come across.
Well, Amra, describe to me just what a Sharia council looks like. If I went to your council in Birmingham, what would I see?
Basically, the process starts with you'd meet a lady and she would ask you, what are you here for? Are you here to ask for a sort of a counselling service, or do you want some sort of mediation, or do you want to dissolve your marriage? And the whole process takes place long before I come in. I am on the panel of 3 people. We're a voluntary body, and women and men who come voluntarily, and they know it has no legal standing because that's made clear to them right at the beginning. And we work within the law of the land, under the law of the land, because if they have a civil divorce, they must go to the civil courts to resolve that.
Well, there's a couple of issues here. One is that I think they are parallel legal systems in the sense that they call themselves judges, for example, those presiding over these. They're known as courts. And for many women who go to them, a lot of them vulnerable women who face domestic violence and marital rape, these are seen to be binding judgments. Now, of course, the government will say women whose rights have been violated can go to a civil court. But the reality is that for a lot of women, there's coercion involved, there's compulsion involved, and it's not so easy to then go and challenge the rulings in a civil court, particularly because you could be accused of even worse things, such as apostasy, if you don't abide by the rulings.
And I guess the issue is, Samia, that within the Muslim community, if a Sharia council has passed judgment, there is an element of it being morally and culturally binding.
Yes, there is that element. I just wanted to come back to also the question of language. A number of the religious scholars, and I call them religious scholars, they did not call themselves judges.
That's right.
They do not call themselves courts because they did not see themselves as in parallel, as a parallel legal system. So the language became quite important. Now, of course, we can dig deeper and think, okay, well, they don't call themselves judges, but effectively, is it a judicial decision-making process anyhow, right? If these certificates are being used in a particular way. But I think we have to be a little bit careful about the use of language.
The problem, though, I think with the imposition of these courts, the initial court came out of an Islam. It is part of an Islamist project, not just in Britain, but globally across the world. And what we see...
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, for example, the Birmingham Sharia Council is highly influenced by the Diabandi movement. You have the...
Very conservative movement that originated
it's an Islamist movement.
Indian subcontinent.
Exactly. It's, and you've got, for example, the Islamic Sharia Council in Leighton, which is highly influenced by Ahl Hadith, which are the South Asian Salafis. So it does come out of an Islamist project, and while there is no official Sharia, what I think these courts do is try to impose the Sharia and make it impossible for Muslims to go beyond what they impose.
Amra.
Muslims are free, and we live in a sort of modern liberal democracy. Muslims are free to decide. Non-Muslims may decide to just get together and have sexual relationship, whereas Muslims feel, those who are practicing feel that they cannot just do that. They go and have a religious marriage, which is a nikah. Now, if they decide that they cannot get on and there are problems, then they will have no recourse to civil courts. They cannot go to family courts, so they come to the Sharia Council because they know it's easy. And in fact, women take just as much advantage of that choice, and they want to have a result.
And the number of Sharia councils that there are in Britain, I get varying numbers. I'm told one person tells me 15, somebody else told me 85.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard for a long time there are 85. In fact, that number is totally unfounded. I'm aware of at least 15 who've joined the UK Sharia Board in the London Cultural Centre. So I'm aware there are at least 15.
And are there official and unofficial Sharia councils?
There may be, as there is no regulation, which, I encourage some sort of regulation and regulatory processes. But I just think that it is a voluntary body. The only authority it has is what people give it. If people want to abide by the decisions, that's up to them. If they don't have to. And yes, there may be, women who are vulnerable. And of course, we want to help those women and sort out those Sharia councils which don't give them their rights and equality in terms of, gender and so on.
I think there's also a lot of research done by groups like South All Black Sisters, like the Iranian Kurdish Women's Rights Organization, that talk about how women are placed in even further traumatic and vulnerable situations because the judges, for example, excuse marital rape or encourage families to stay together despite domestic violence.
There may be some.
I think this raises an important question of the space in which the dispute is resolved. So it's a potential conflict here. So under Islamic law, one of the arguments is that before a divorce is pronounced, we need to consider reconciliation. And if that doesn't work, then mediation in the traditional sense. It's that point of reconciliation that creates the potential conflict. And many Muslim women that I have interviewed in the past and I'm interviewing with my current research have said that's the problematic context.
And in reality, how much mediation is there?
There is a lot of mediation. I mean, that's the space in which a number of scholars said, look, we respect the rights of Muslim women, and if they don't want it, that's absolutely fine. But we have to invoke it because it's an Islamic principle. Now, in Birmingham, that may not be the case, but there are a number of Sharia councils that do this.
Well, let me remind you that you're listening to Beyond Belief, and today we're discussing how Sharia councils operate in Britain today. Is there any place for the implementation of Sharia law in those parts of our society which value it? Do Sharia councils discriminate against women? And with me are Mariam Namazi, Amra Bone and Samia Bano. Gina Khan wanted a Muslim divorce from her husband in the 1990s. At the time, there were fewer Sharia councils to go to than there are today. She told me about her experience.
We'd got married against his family, and it did turn into domestic violence, actually. Throughout the years, even before or after divorce, I did go through all emotional, physical, financial, you name it. It was domestic abuse and violence.
And the situation was complicated because you were married according to Muslim law, but it wasn't actually a civil marriage. So in law, according to the UK, you didn't actually have a marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, when I look back now, it was a very foolish decision. When you're in love, you don't realise that you have to do something to safeguard yourself, and it's important to have that security. But I didn't think I was an independent working woman. We'd gone against so much. Just having the Muslim marriage was hard enough.
And that complicated matters when it came to a divorce, because you didn't have to get one in British law because you weren't really married, but you did have to get one in Muslim law.
Well, I had to get one because it was a matter of my pride and honour, or people in the community would have still referred to me as his wife. And I didn't want that anymore. But the way it was, and what I understood about our culture and religion, was it was in the hands of the man. So he, even after separating for 2 years, he would not give me a divorce.
So what did you have to do? What was the process when you decided you were going to get a Muslim divorce?
You're talking, very early 90s, and I started to hear about how a woman has the right to get a Muslim divorce through something called khulla. I'd never heard of it before. And so I approached my local mosque. I was taken into, ushered in a back room. I spoke to this mullah and, left it there. He said to speak to somebody for me. They could help. But then at 11 o'clock at night, he rang me drunk. And it was a very sad situation because instead of supporting me, I was a vulnerable mother of 2 young children at the time. Instead of supporting me, he chose to ring me, drunk in the middle of the night, wondering whether I was thinking of marriage ever again. And I found it really alarming because I wasn't some typical, meek person. I was a secular liberal Muslim, so it really shocked me that he even had the nerve to do that. So I didn't go back, actually.
So you took matters into your own hands. You launched a public protest.
Well, I did more than a public protest. I can't say I'm fully proud of it, but I had no choice at the time. I then went to a Sharia council actually as well and paid about £100, and every 3 months they sent a letter. I didn't know what they were doing. Perhaps they couldn't find him, but I did that too. But in the end, I got very impatient with what was going on and I wanted to move out the area as well. And so what I did in the end was I just put up A4 wanted posters everywhere, just demanding a divorce. So I did with every relative of his, with every friend of his. I just put it on there. I want a divorce. He's disappearing on me. He won't give me a divorce. I wanted a divorce. So I think in the end what made him do it was the fact that I was humiliating him.
Sharia councils pride themselves on offering mediation. Did you ever consider going to mediation and trying to reconcile with your husband, or was that completely off the cards?
Oh, no. I mean, the one thing I did understand was I didn't need him for that because I was already dealing with it through the police and they were aware that I was a victim of domestic violence.
Do you recognise that there are some devout Muslim women, practising Muslims, for whom Sharia councils really do perform an important function?
The only important function, in my opinion, that Sharia councils perform is they have given freedom to women for a divorce, which was, a big, big issue in our communities. But at the same time, they are the same people who then started to interfere in family law, discriminated against you if you were going to talk about any inheritance rights, because they will refer to Sharia, and in Sharia a woman only gets 1/3, and British-born Asian women here are not accepting that now. The question needs to be asked, okay, you are supporting women who want a Muslim divorce, but why are you not doing anything about these nikahs that you perform, Muslim marriages that you are performing, without registering them? Because what this has led to is the practice of polygamy in this country.
That was Gina Khan, and she paints a very bleak picture, Amra. How do you respond to her account?
I'm sorry to hear that she had such an experience, and I think perhaps the Sharia councils have moved on from the 90s. We were different to begin with, and we continue to give those rights to women. In fact, our Sharia council provides women with a voice, like she was saying.
Mariam, how typical is Gina's experience?
It's very typical, particularly when you look at women's rights groups. That's the experience that they've had, is because a lot of vulnerable women are coming to them for assistance, and you're seeing that women do feel that they've been put in even more vulnerable positions by going forward to these courts. So I don't think the courts have moved on since the 90s. I think, in fact, they're worse. It's alarming the amount of discrimination that's taking place in these councils.
Samia, how concerned are you about the way Sharia councils handle cases like Gina's?
I think Gina's case raises a number of important questions that we need to address. And Amra spoke a little bit earlier about the nikah, the unregistered marriage. Now, we have to think really carefully about why second and third generation British Muslim women are potentially choosing not to register their marriage. My research revealed that actually it wasn't a question of agency and choice, but it was also sometimes husbands wanting their marriages not to be registered because it's an easier exit of divorce. So it's not necessarily a religious identity.
The inevitable question, therefore, is, would you, as part of a Sharia council, recommend any woman that, as well as having the nikah, having the Muslim marriage, they should have a civil marriage so that it is regularised under English law? Would you specifically tell people that?
We've done that regularly, and I personally have done that, because the Islamic marriage is about providing women and children security and protection. Now, Sharia councils cannot provide that. Nikah marriage on its own cannot provide that. It's only the law of the land can provide them security. And many of them say, why did you not register? Why did you not have a civil marriage? Oh, we didn't get round to it. Majority of the people did not understand. They thought the Islamic contract, because it involved the consent of the parties, it had two witnesses, they sort of thought that that would be recognised. Now, in some cases, yes, the men may not want it to be registered, but we also have had women who do not want it to be registered, many of them very highly qualified, chemical engineers and so on.
Mariam.
Look, I think the thing is that, of course, again, it goes in favour of men, because if a marriage isn't registered, it's not considered a legal marriage. Men can have up to 4 wives, and therefore problem solved for them. It's the women, again, that have a huge problem as a result. And I think, for example, you talk about your mosque and the work that you're doing, but I've read that you, for example, support polygamy. What's your position on polygamy? I've read in the papers.
It's women's choice.
Again, polygamy is not about women's choice, it's about men's choice. And that's the reality
that's your misunderstanding
of what Sharia councils do. They promote a very segregationist, a fundamentalist point of view.
Anything can be
I'm
abused.
sorry, I didn't interrupt you while you were speaking. If you can let me speak as well.
You're
Is that all right?
Because
this is not a Sharia court, so I can speak. My point is
flabbergasted.
The point that I'm trying to make is that, look, the reality is that women, for example, even if they're given the khola divorce by these courts, that often means that they have to give up their dowry and the marital rights that were applicable to them. So basically the point is that it is discriminatory because the law itself, in content, in intent, is discriminatory.
It's a matter of choice. Those who want to come, ultimately women are free to decide for themselves.
There might be women who choose to go to these courts, but the fact of the matter is that even if people choose something, it doesn't mean that it's not discriminatory or that violations aren't taking place or that it isn't harmful. Women have a right to religion, but the right to courts is something very, very different, and I think we shouldn't be confusing the two.
But I think it's also important to bear in mind what the research indicates is that actually Muslim women also forum shop Sharia councils based on expense.
And they might go to one and they don't like it, so they'll go to another.
They'll go on to another Sharia council. So women can and do also navigate within these processes themselves. But I think we have to be very careful about how choice and autonomy and capacity and these concepts are expressed via a Sharia council, because effectively the women that I've interviewed don't feel compelled to go to Sharia councils. They do exercise choice in terms of going to these bodies, but in terms of what happens when they're at the bodies themselves is a different issue. So I don't think we can collapse all agency and choice as in they're compelled and they're forced to go to these bodies, because there's enough research to know that women do exercise choice in terms of which body they want to go to.
And having said all of that, if you were to ban Sharia councils, the issues wouldn't go away. The cultural issues that lie at the heart of the Muslim community wouldn't disappear.
Even if you ban domestic violence, it doesn't end domestic violence, but the law is an important line in the sand of what's acceptable. Why should minority women, black and minority women, be relegated to second, third-rate systems of justice? There should be one civil law for all, and especially when you look at women's access to justice, it's the law and not religion that can be the basis of it, that must be the basis of it.
Samir.
In terms of what do we do with these bodies, it raises very important questions. And the only thing I would say is that there's been a lot of research providing proposals on how we can accommodate these bodies, right? How can we make them more accountable to state law? But it's interesting because Muslim communities and these Sharia councils haven't taken these proposals up because, in effect, they don't want to become parallel legal systems. They have neither the process, neither the expertise, neither the maturity, right, in terms of providing equality before the law to deliver on family law issues. There's contestation between the bodies themselves. They don't necessarily agree with each other.
And isn't that a real issue, Amra? Because some of the issues that have affected the Muslim community in Britain and elsewhere, issues like the patriarchal nature of society, forced marriage, honour-based violence, all of that. Now, your Sharia council may be a model of practice, but there will be other Sharia councils that are not like yours that may be reinforcing all these things that are part of cultural identity.
The UK Sharia Board started the process of trying to help the Sharia councils to organise themselves, to better themselves. And that process has started. They are fully on board in terms of working within the law of the land. We ourselves in the Sharia Council in Birmingham are not trying to apply this model or that model. Our context is unique.
Should it be the law that you cannot have a nikah, a Muslim marriage, without also having a civil marriage? Should we ban them completely unless it goes hand in hand with a civil marriage?
Well, I think we see that in many countries. For example, in Pakistan, immediately all marriages are also civil marriages. I think it's possible. You've got Sharia law banned in Rojava, Syrian Kurdistan. So it is possible to promote the supremacy of civil law and civil marriage.
Well, I would just say that the Muslim communities themselves have actually taken the initiative to do that. And I think the Birmingham Sharia Council, well, certainly the Birmingham Mosque does this. That if you now go to the Birmingham Central Mosque for a nikah, there's a registrar in the building. It's a registered building, and you can have, and you're encouraged to have the civil marriage, and in fact you're expected to do that. So the communities themselves have been trying to get rid of unregistered marriages themselves, and I think that's an important point to bear in mind. And in terms of regulation, there is a question of exceptionalising Muslim communities. Muslim communities feel under the gaze, they feel exceptionalised, they feel that when it's a question of surveillance, when the whole question of the Sharia review was placed into the counter-extremism strategy, a number of Sharia councils were upset about that because there was a link being made between extremism and Muslim communities. So I think we need to be very careful about exceptionalising.
There is also another option that accommodation of Islamic law within the law of the land, and the law of the land would remain supreme, just like it is in Israel, for instance, where Sharia Islamic law is part of the structure of the law, and parts of Greece as well, that they have appointed a mufti who deals with Islamic marriages. Now, we have a number of options available. It just depends how we go forward.
Mariam.
I think there is a contradiction between what these courts are doing and the law of the land. There's a clear contradiction. And I think, in a sense, that's one fundamental question we need to deal with. The other is that for how much longer must minority women be seen through the prism of religion, but also the most conservative and fundamentalist version of religion, really?
We know that there is a Home Office review into Sharia councils. One final question to each one of you. If you could see one thing happen as a result of that review, what would it be, Samia?
I think it would be very important for us to know precisely what kind of Islamic law is being practiced. We don't know. There's a gap in knowledge. There is a complexity there on the ground. So if the Home Office review can provide us with some insight, and also the experience of Muslim women, because there's such a diverse experiences, and I think that would be very important.
Mariam?
I think any government review should be looking at dismantling all parallel legal systems. There has to be one law for all in this country, and women's human rights have to be paramount, not religion and not religious law.
Amra?
I wish that Home Office review is able to regulate the processes of the Sharia councils, and then enables the Sharia councils to work within the law of the land. And I hope that there would be some sort of negotiation and collaboration within the law of the land, where the law of the land remains supreme.
Well, that's all for this week. My thanks to Sami Obano, Mariam Namazi and Amra Bone.